Good morning, everybody, or good afternoon. It's just bang on noon here. And welcome to the second of our webinar series on this one on pome crop pollination, linking Canada and Latin America particularly. So these three webinars, the one we've already had on greenhouse pollination, and then the next one, which will be on oilseeds, came out of the International Commission on Plant-Pollinator Relations with the International Pollination Symposium in Cholula a couple of years ago, when it was decided that we should do this, and it's sponsored through the Natural Sciences and Engineering Research Council of the Canadian Pollination Initiative, that has the money that allowed us to get together this way and think about problems in crop pollination between Canada and Latin America and anywhere else in the world of people who have joined us. So that's where we are, and we're grateful to everybody who's been able to join us this morning or this afternoon. And I will hand over first of all to Dr. Cory Sheffield, who's at the Royal Saskatchewan Museum in Canada, but did his PhD work on apple pollination in the Annapolis Valley in Nova Scotia. So Cory, take it away.
Oh, I hope everyone can hear me okay. As Peter indicated, I've been working on apple pollination and actually the contributions of bees for some time now. And today I'm just going to discuss some of my research as it relates to how pollination and pollinator effectiveness influences fruit quality. And this is not always as straightforward as you might believe. There are several things in place there that have not previously really been looked at a lot, which I will discuss in this presentation. So it is well-known fact that bees are required for apple pollination. This is true throughout the world wherever you grow apple, though the species involved differ among the apple growing regions. Here you can see a solitary bee, a species of Andrena, coming into contact with the stigmas of the apple flower. The apple flower has 5 stigmas and styles, each leading to one of the 5 carpels. Each of the carpels normally with 2 ovules, and therefore producing 2 seeds per carpel, or 10 seeds per fruit for most cultivars of apple. At the base of the styles, the 5 carpels are fused, a condition called syncarpy. The terms perfect and imperfect here refer to whether or not these the area where these carpels are fused, whether or not they actually communicate with each other or not. In other words, a potential area for pollen tubes to cross from one carpel to the other. So this is the scenario here. Apple has typically been thought to be imperfectly syncarpic. That is, when pollen tubes grow down from one stigma through the style, they are confined to that carpel associated with that stigma and style. This has long been assumed, but has never really been tested. So what I show on the on this figure here is, for most cultivars, we really do not know what happens with pollen tube growth in this area right here. So this question certainly has implications for pollination and resulting fruit quality in apple, and that's sort of what I'm going to address here in the first part of my presentation. So if apple flowers are imperfectly syncarpic, as has been suggested, this should have important implications for fruit quality. Pollination efficiency should be important to ensure fruit quality, as full pollination of all 5 stigmas would be required to produce a fruit with a full complement of seeds. In other words, if you have inequality in pollination levels on those 5 stigmatic surfaces, that ultimately will lead to misshapen fruit, which is unmarketable. So again, this has long been an assumption that you need to pollinate each of those 5 stigmas, but there has actually been very little research supporting this. So we did an experiment on Macintosh, which is a common apple cultivar grown in Canada. And what we found that, at least for some cultivars, the answer is no. Not all cultivars are imperfectly syncarpic. And this here graph is one of the figures from the paper that I'm putting up here. And what it basically demonstrates, this is the number of seeds, in this case per carpel, and on the x-axis is the number of stigmas pollinated. And you can see this line here basically shows what you would expect to find if the flower was imperfectly syncarpic. And you can see in these cases here at least, there were more seeds than expected. So what this suggests is that that pollen tube growth is not restricted to one stigma, one carpel, as has been suggested previously. There is an area here of intercarpal communication, which basically means that if you pollinate one stigma very thoroughly, you have the potential to get a full complement of seeds. Pollen tubes can grow down, and then once they reach this area, they can grow into any of the carpels, which has important implications for the quality of the pollination or pollinator visit and the resulting fruit that comes from that. So as such, pollination levels may not be equal among the 5 stigmas to produce high quality fruit. This is important from the standpoint if you have diverse pollinator communities visiting the apple. So in Canada, for instance, we have bees which range in size from large bumblebees to small sweat bees. And because of this mechanism in apple flowers, even some of these small bees, if they even pollinate thoroughly one of these stigmatic surfaces, you can still get a very good apple. It's important to point out that this condition called perfect syncarpy may not be found in all apple cultivars, and in fact, it's one of those things we really don't know about the apple cultivars that we have developed, and I'll talk a little bit about this later on in my presentation. So saying this, I've basically told you that pollination levels and equality on the 5 stigmas may not be directly linked to apple fruit quality. So how then do bees influence fruit quality? So to address this issue, this is one of the things that we did here in Nova Scotia as well. And what we did, and you can see here on the map here on your right, this is an apple orchard that we did, and we set up this orchard to obtain a gradient of pollinators in this end of the orchard. So the bees were introduced in this area, and in theory what we were hoping is that we would have high numbers of these managed pollinators in this area of the orchard, and that they would in theory decline in abundance as you got towards the back part of the orchard. So from here on in, any graphs that you see that mention zone 1 is the area of the orchard where bees were very abundant or they were released, where zone 6 represents the area far away from these bees. So I'm hoping that that is clear. So what we found is that when we looked at pollination levels, and here I'm just showing 1 year's worth of the data, there were no real differences in the pollination levels across the whole orchard. So if you consider that only 10 grains of pollen are actually required under ideal conditions, we were looking at anywhere, the maximum we stopped counting after 500 grains per flower, so 100 grains per stigma. What you can see from this graph, the top graph shows early flowering, mid-flowering, and then this is the late bloom period here. On the x-axis, you have the zones. Again, number 1 is close to where the bees were, and this is the number of pollen grains deposited. What we found is that there were no differences across the zones throughout the orchard. But I will point out here that in early flowering, pollination levels were quite low. You can see there are a lot of zeros here. And we attributed that, at least in this year, to poor weather conditions during early flowering. In the second year, our pollination levels were very high throughout the study because we had a very good flowering period for apple. So despite our pollination levels not varying at all or not being significant across the orchards, we did find a percent fruit set, which is shown here for both years, and the mean number of seeds per fruit per zone were significantly higher in areas of the orchard where we released the bees. And this, you can see here, the white versus the gray just represent two separate years where we did this. So these factors, fruit set and the number of seeds produced per fruit, were seemingly influenced by bees, the bees that were released within this area. And just to say a little bit more about the number of seeds per fruit, this is specifically from this study, but there has long been a known relationship between the number of seeds per fruit and the fruit weight. So the more seeds you have, the heavier fruit is going to be. However, we also looked at other parameters to assess fruit quality in apple, and what this here graph shows is basically how seed distribution can occur within apple. And in this case here, we show all 8 possibilities for seed distribution. So the black areas here represent carpels with seeds in them, and here you can see 4 carpels without seeds. So what I do here is highlight in red carpel category D and E, as these are unique in that they represent the extremes of, I guess, poor apple quality, in that you have at least 3 adjacent carpels which are empty, so there are no seeds in these things. And as I'll show you in a few moments, this is the worst case scenario for fruit quality when it comes to apple. So a few slides ago, I showed you the relationship between seed number and fruit weight. Here, this graph shows the relationship of, or the fruit weight resulting from these various carpel conditions. So in this case here, you don't really see a strong pattern with these cases, but again, this isn't looking at seed number. This is more seed distribution. So just to give you an example, this here fruit it has 4 carpels with seeds, but I do not determine whether or not this represents 4 seeds or 8 seeds. So this is just the carpel condition. So no differences in fruit weight among these carpel categories, except when you get a condition where there are very few seeds. This is something that you would expect. Following up on this a bit more, we also looked at 2 symmetry indices. The first one is a commonly used type of index to look at fruit quality in apple, or variations of this are used. And it's basically looking at the fruit and comparing the minimum versus the maximum diameter of the fruit. So if you divide the minimum diameter by the maximum diameter, you'll get a value between 0 and 1. A value approaching 1 is an apple which is perfectly symmetric, or a very good quality. So this is one index that we use to look at fruit quality in apple. And the second was just a variation of that, except we looked at maximum versus minimum fruit height. And again, the index was based on the minimum height divided by the maximum height. So this was measured before we cut the fruit for obvious reasons. And what we found here is that the second index, symmetry index B, was much more sensitive to the presence or absence of seeds within the fruit. So you see in this top graph that the number of seeds per fruit in all these cases here, the index was still relatively high, around averaging between 0.93 and 0.95 across all conditions. However, when we looked at symmetry index B, which again was based on fruit height, you can see, especially when you had very few seeds, the values were much lower. And on the right of this graph, the important point here is that these carpel categories, especially D and E, these are the ones that you had adjacent carpels, 3 or 4 adjacent carpels which were empty. They had very, very low symmetry index values compared to the other carpel conditions. So you can see that using this symmetry index B is a way of evaluating fruit quality is much more sensitive to the presence or absence of seeds within these carpels, which, as I'll just demonstrate in a minute, is I think is an important factor to look at for fruit quality in apple. So getting back to the bees, I already mentioned how fruit set and the number of seeds per fruit were influenced, but when we start to look at these different carpel conditions, we also found that these highest quality fruit, we didn't have any fruit that were perfect in terms of having a full complement of seeds, but the next best thing where you only had one empty carpel, these fruit made up the highest proportion of apples in the area of orchard closest to where the bees were. And the poorest quality fruits, especially D in this case, these were found as you got further, more common as you got away from the where our bees were released. This here may be an artifact of this end of the orchard being closer to natural habitat, so there was probably some wild bees playing a part back here as well. But basically, other than pollination, all of the variables of fruit quality and yield that we looked at were influenced by the presence of these bees in this area. So I guess just to wrap up my presentation, I think historically, when we look at the reasons why we develop apple cultivars, and as you can see here, more than 7,500 cultivars of apples have been developed, but most of these are based on the genetic lineages of only a few types. So in North America, McIntosh and Cortland, things like that are prominent cultivars that are used for genetic breeding of new cultivars. When we select cultivars to develop, it's always based on the end product, the fruit. So when we evaluate a fruit for selection, we're always looking at traits of the fruit, such as ripeness, the firmness of the fruit, its sweetness, so its taste, the acidity, how well it stores for winter, so it can be sold throughout the winter. Also, disease resistance and things like that. However, one of the things that remains clear of all these cultivars is that, or most of them anyway, is that they are self-unfruitful and cross-pollination by bees is required. So in developing these new cultivars, we still have to be very much aware of the genetic compatibility of cultivars. So when we're setting up new orchards, we have to consider, are the trees that you're planting genetically compatible so you can have pollinizer varieties intermixed with your crop to ensure that you're getting the best compatible pollen for your crop. But also you have to ensure things like the flowering phenology of all your cultivars are coinciding, so bees will cross-pollinate. One of the things which is absent or seemingly absent from the development of new cultivars is selecting floral traits which may be more attractive to pollinators. We do know things like red delicious flowers are not that attractive to honeybees in terms of pollinating them. They sidework these flowers to access the nectar, but they do not pollinate these flowers well because of that. So if you do a survey of all the different apple cultivars, there certainly is great variety in the shape of the fruit, and I think this is probably also reflected in the floral morphology as well. Things like petal length, the length of your anther stigma. These things can also be varied as well, and as I showed you at the front of the presentation, the internal flower structure is also very important to take into consideration. And when we develop these cultivars, we have no idea of whether or not we're creating a case of imperfect syncarpy or a perfect syncarpy, and these variables are very ultimately are important to the quality of the fruit. So I think that's one of the things that is missing from not just apple, but many of the cultivars that we develop of crops which are insect pollinated. So this is my last slide. The cultivars that we develop, at least from the floral perspective, is going to potentially influence the foraging behavior of bees, thus affecting their pollination effectiveness. The internal morphology and perfect syncarpy, as I discussed earlier, are also important factors influencing or that link between pollination levels and the ending fruit quality. And as I just mentioned, how pollen grows down through these stigmas and whether or not they unite is also going to be based on not only things like the viability of the pollen, but also the genetic compatibility of the pollen. So there are still lots of basic research on the apple cultivars that we should be looking at when we develop them. So I think that's pretty much my presentation. So I'll stop there.
Well, thank you very much, Cory. Certainly, if anybody has any questions they would like to ask, please type them in the chat portion down there, and we can sort of address those as we go along. And I think we're going to turn now to Fabiana's presentation from Brazil. And that will approach the apple pollination from a relatively new area in terms of apple production in the state of Bahia. And so we'll let Fabiana take it away and tell us what's been going on in Brazil, and we'll be able to draw some parallels between what we've done up here in Canada with what's been going on down in Bahia. So thank you very much, Fabiana. We'll invite you to join us.
Hi, good afternoon, everybody. First, I would like to say that I'm glad to be here and have this opportunity to present to you some results of my research group from Bahia state in Brazil, and the title is Pollination Depth in Apple Crops in Tropics. Biotic pollination is important for crop pollination, as ecosystem services, and 75% of the main world crops depend on pollinators for fruit seed production. So that world annual value of pollination services provided by pollinators in 2005 was evaluated at about 9.5% of the agricultural world production. Biodiversity is important for many ecosystem processes, including pollinators. Agriculture needs biodiversity of pollinators, and bees are the most important group. In Brazil, native bees and also Apis mellifera, the Africanized honeybee, also are essential to apples, passion fruits, tomatoes, especially meliponian bees. They help, native bees help to improve quality of fruits in guava, castor bean, strawberry. So some examples of the highly important, how it is important to have functional diversity in apple crops and other agricultural crop systems. Regarding apples, we know that the most plantations, cross-pollination provided by the managed honeybee, Apis mellifera, which is considered an efficient pollinator, although native bees also provide this service. And nowadays, apples are cultivated in many countries of South America, and the highest producers countries in terms of yield, production, total production in tons and harvested areas are in Brazil. And nowadays, Brazil is the second highest in both yield and production, and this increase represented about 6,000 tons during the last decades. In these main countries in South America, the varieties that are most cultivated and consumed are, in Brazil, Fuji and Gala, and more recently, Eva, which is a new variety, relatively new variety of apple that is rapidly spreading and is also important for the internal market of Brazilian apple production. In Chile and Argentina, the varieties that are mainly cultivated are Red Delicious and Granny Smith. Where do apple grow in Brazil? Here I show you the main varieties produced and the regions to where they are spreading over. You see that the harvest area of Fuji and Gala represents the majority of apple production in Brazil, at about 90% of the total plantations. But the Eva variety is spreading over new regions in Brazil, and the potential is very high for representativeness in terms of economic and opening of new markets. And these spreads are mainly from northeast and southeast Brazil, while Fuji and Gala are restricted to the south region of Brazil. Ibiquara is the municipality of Ibiquara in Bahia. We have an important new center site of production of this Eva variety, but it started only in 2005. Nonetheless, it is already important in terms of national production. The site of Eva production in Brazil, where the municipality of Ibiquara is located, is known as Chapada Diamantina region, which is in the central part of Bahia state, and also is a very beautiful place with wonderful natural attractions, and is very touristic region because of that. In this place of natural beauty, the main vegetation type is rupestrum field, which is a type of a savanna that grows in high altitude, which is the main vegetation type in that region. Climate is mild with dry season, and it's good for growing this new variety of apple. This region became also known because of the establishment of the huge area of agriculture in where the conventional farming system predominates, with an irrigation system. In this place, many crops grow, many annual, others are perennial crops. The annual crops are potatoes, mainly, and tomatoes, and perennial crops are diverse kind of fruits like apples, coffee, seed citrus, and others. And many of these crops need pollinators. So, Chapada Diamantina has both ecological and economical importance. Well, there is just one site of apple plantation that ranges at 45 hectares in this place. And all the data I'm going to present here were gathered from this site in select cells representing a specific design. Okay, and in order to answer some important questions we are going to address in the further in this presentation. At first, let me show you some information about the apple crop system and what it has to do with pollination. Because of apples varieties are incompatible, Eva, which is the commercial variety they planted there, and Princess, which is the pollinizer variety, has to be grown together, are raised together, so that the later Princess provides the pollen, compatible pollen, to develop seeds and fruits in apple. from Eva tree. So in this Brazilian apple orchard, trees are arranged in a way that we find 5 producing trees, 5 Eva, to 1 princess. And this design is recommended by Dr. Kevan's research on apple, and he said that by reducing the distance between pollinized and produced varieties, we can have pollination improved, okay, by because it favors pollen flow provided by pollinators within the ocean, within varieties, between varieties. Sorry. In terms of floral morphology in biology, we noted that pollen is viable when releasing, when the flowers are open, and stigmas are longer receptive. And syncope allows pollen to reach the ovules from any of the 5 stigmas. But floral morphology in biology are kind of linked with the are linked why in the slide should be shown why the protein is not shown. Let's see. Well, there's one slide that doesn't open, but what I would like to tell you is that when the type of resource the bees collect in flowers influence their behavior and the chance of the flower to be pollinated. So when bees, even Apis mellifera or other native bees, approach to the flower to collect pollen, they are frequently are more able to pollinate because they land on stigmas and anthers, and so their movements in their favors the carrying on of pollen. They carry pollen when they leave flower. While when they land on the flower to collect nectar, they do that on petals and move around the petals, on the petals, are surrounding the stigmas and anthers, and there is a less chance for them to touch the anthers and stigmas when they go to collect nectar. So pollen gathering bees are more bound to pollinate than nectar feeding bees. But in general, diversity and abundance of free-living pollinators are low within the orchard. We are talking about no more than 10 bee species that are found in abundance that correspond to 1, 2 bees, very infrequently they are. And Apis mellifera is the most common bee species. So based on this background, we have these 4 main research questions that I'm going to present to you. So our first question is there pollination left in apple orchard? If there is, how many africanized honeybee hives in the Untitled are needed to diminish pollination deficit? If so, could pollen trap on beehive entrance increase its set? And finally, if you had native bees, do native bees perform equal better than africanized honeybee pollinating apple? So, regarding our first question, if pollination deficit occurs in this orchard, we compared the results from number of seeds we found in fruits from cross-manual pollination and from and from natural pollination tests. So we marked some birds, and then we counted the number of seeds in fruits formed from both of these periods. And we found that there is pollination deficit. Yes, only for a mean number of seeds. When natural pollination was done, was about four seeds, and that was significantly lower than the number of seeds we found when cross-pollination was done. So even if the farmer used 5 africanized honeybee hives per hectare, there was pollination deficit in apple, suggesting that this number of colonies are not enough to provide the desirable level of pollination in this system. So our next step was supplement the orchard with different increasing number of colonies that ranged from 7, 9, and 11 hives per hectare. And for each of these densities, we tested also with travel, who was responsible for any waste. Our main results about these tests were: when we compared the increased number of colonies and increasing number of seeds, we found that was not a significant increase in seed set as the number of colonies increased. So it was not significant. But there is a pollinator limitation. And the number of hives that are required to get a satisfactory level of pollination is even higher than in other Brazilian regions and foreign countries. If you had to use the 11 hives hectare that, as suggested by our experiment, to get 8 seeds in fruits, that would be inviable, because these bees are highly aggressive and could not be managed naturally in the current measure that this apple crop needs. But study also highlighted that some improvements in management of these honeybees already used by the farmer are required. We have to take care in terms of where colonies are placed within orchards, the number of hives, and then in that case, without any management, we don't need too much, but 7 hives, it seems to be the most feasible in terms of economics, and because it will be too costly for the farmer, and also in terms of current practice of management for the crop. Also, quality of hives is an important point that should be taken care about. What we have now, the most abundant and frequent bee in the orchard are the honeybees. So they are most frequent on flowers. And the high demand from these honeybees is probably linked to the pollinators within the orchard. We believe the amount of suitable habitat in the surrounding area is too low to support the natural bee populations or to let them go within the orchard and foraging frequently. So, in this case, could pollen trap on beehive interest increase its sets? Since we don't have much native bees, wouldn't do anything else to get pollination service provided by honeybees improved? So, because of that, we decided to test the pollen trap. And pollen trap is advised that partially remove pollen from bees cortically when they get back into the hive after a foraging trip, forcing bees to visit more flowers to collect pollen. We saw that they are more about to pollinate when they collect pollen. We believe that improving this action, improving the collection of pollen, would favor pollination in this epoch. But comparing the results when we had only the increasing densities of hives and when we added pollen traps, we can see that using 7 hives hectare with pollen trap got similar results as when we had 11 hives hectare without pollen traps. The number of seeds formed in both treatments were not significantly different, suggesting that using 7 hives hectare added with pollen trap is currently a viable alternative to reduce pollination deficit. And pollen trap, although it had a limited role in improving this seed set increase, it works under a certain level of density, that is 7 hives hectare. We note that when we increase density, pollen trap had no differential effects compared when we use 7 honeybee hives hectare with pollen trap. So it's currently the best option for the farming. So native bees could improve the service provided by apes in the ocean as pollinator. So we tested this hypothesis by comparing experimentally the results we got on seed formation and fruit formation in plots where we put together Apis mellifera and stingless bees, and in plots where only 7 hives hectare with pollen traps of Apis mellifera are present. So to adding native bee, in case we tested Melipona quadrifaciata antidioide, improved the performance of Apis mellifera in pollination. So we tested this. And why we used Melipona quadrifaciata? Because from all the bees we found in the surrounding area in natural nests, only this species can be managed in rational colonies. There is technique for her, and this species is naturally found in this area, although we didn't find any nest of this species. It's registered for natural occurrence in this area. And what we found, both fruit set and seed set do increase it when Melipona bee were present. Melipona quadrifaciata increased seed set in Eva variety in about 60%, and fruit set increased about 44%. So, seed set and fruit set production were higher in this condition when Melipona was present than when the supplementation was done only with Apis mellifera. What does it suggest? So despite, what is important in here is that despite of the importance of Apis mellifera as pollinators of apples, using managed native bees can improve this service provided by honeybees. Suggestion of complementarity effects between them. Biodiversity is better than having just one species. So what would be the more effective alternative for a longer time period? Would better to bring back wild pollinators to a bushel. In this sense, it would be very important to provide nesting and foraging habitats closer to crop areas, so that pollinators could move between natural areas and crop plantations. So having friendly landscape designs and friendly practices to pollinators within orchard could help in bringing back those bees and should be the best to do. Managed native bees also pollinate, and that would reduce the costs of production and would help to the conservation actions in cropland. Obrigada. Thanks. That was my final slide, and my email for contact is here. Thank
you very much, Fabiana. We've got a quarter of an hour for some questions. And there's one question for Fabiana.
Okay. May I answer in voice or in chat?
You go ahead and answer, Fabiana, in whatever language you prefer.
Well, okay. We do not commercially produce africanized honeybees. The farmer usually gets them from beekeepers. Beekeepers have them mostly for producing honey, and in specific times during the year, they rent colonies to pollination, but is not the main purpose of beekeepers in that place. Apis mellifera, instead of other native bees, currently are the easy, because it's easier and is already known that Apis mellifera, africanized honeybees, were no techniques. That's not enough technique to guarantee that we can manage and rent enough native bee colonies to pollinate apple.
Cory, if you want to answer verbally, you can for this question.
Hi, Peter. I'm not certain if it's valid or not. My understanding is that once pollen gets on the body of a bee, if it's packed into the curbicula, it's no longer viable, or it loses viability really quick. And I would assume that they would be pretty well groomed by the time they got back to the hive. So I would think if there was any transfer within the hive from bee to bee, it would be minimal. It'd be minimal at best.
I think I agree with you, Cory, and certainly the work we did on apple orchards here in Ontario, following genes around in the orchard, indicated that the movement of genes in an apple orchard is very localized. The neighborhood size from any one tree is only about 5 trees away, and it was on the basis of that genetic information that we gathered, working with Brian Husband here and Paul Krohn, that we came up with that neighborhood figure, and that is the figure that has been used in planting some of the new orchards in Bahia that Fabiana mentioned. It seemed quite interesting that there was this coincidence of information.
Well, the interest in managing native bees in Bahia or in Brazil in general are still in the very beginning, especially for pollination purpose. We have some examples of success in creating suitable techniques to manage them, but we need to work a lot on spreading this point of view and including this in governmental agenda in order to have the problems with creating and managing honeybees for commercial purpose to be well established and managed. And we need more information about how profitable could be using native bees instead of honeybees only to get higher increase in productivities in our region. What happens with the apple crop we studied happens in other places, in other crops. So it's a widespread problem, the absence of suitable techniques for managing native bees in an ideal way.
Yes, somebody's typed an answer. So if we can just sort of hang on a little bit, we'll have perhaps an answer from Argentina as to what's going on pome fruit pollination there. We know there's a lot of expansion of pome fruit growing in particularly northern Mexico, in the state of Chihuahua. There are some quite large orchards being established on irrigated land. So I think we're seeing things increase. Nonetheless, the whole issue of pollination does seem to have some sort of falls between the cracks when you start talking to the agronomists. Certainly in Canada, we get the idea that a number of the people who are planting apple orchards put pollination as a very low priority in their overall considerations, yet spend lots of money on irrigation, pruning, and the stock that they plant, and of course in trellising and so on, and pest control. but pollination doesn't seem to get the attention that it deserves. The answer to, do other countries in South America use africanized bees for commercial pollination? The answer to that is yes, very much so. Basically, they don't have any choice in anywhere south of Mexico from a point of view of using managed honeybees for pollination, because really all there are honeybees with the Apis mellifera scutellata genetic stock within their genomes. So all countries in South America use africanized bees for pollination. Well, the leaders now, I mean, they're buying up the bumblebee industry. Well, before we finish, we've just got a couple of minutes. One of the things that came up in the greenhouse pollination webinar, which is available for you to look at, was the use of pollinators for the distribution of biological control agents. So the bees that are put in for pollination are also coming out of hives which are equipped with dispensers that take biological control agents out to the flowers. This is a technology that was developed on pome fruit, I think on pears, for the control of fire blight in the states of Utah and California some years ago, and we're looking at that too, using bumblebees in apple orchards for that sort of technology. So that technology is starting to take off now, and I think it'd be interesting to see how that develops. There just wasn't time this time really to sort of get into that, but just as a point of interest. After we're all finished, please keep in touch with one another and let us know, because it might be very useful if we were to have another webinar on the subject of fruit pollination, perhaps a more general webinar, perhaps with small and tender fruit as well as pome and stone fruits. And we would be more than happy to try to organize that through the Canadian Pollination Initiative here in Canada. for a worldwide audience again. So please let us know if you would like something to be followed up on. I think we're becoming quite expert at this now. Victoria has been our techno guru in terms of looking after this and has done a wonderful job drawing this together and keeping people informed about how best to use this marvelous new technology. So thank you very much all for joining us, and we'll look forward to hearing your feedback and additional questions. So thank you very much. The answer to the topics, yes, send your ideas to Victoria. She's just putting up her electronic mail address for you to send it. We're thinking also of having a webinar on coffee and coffee pollination and crop protection in the not too distant future. We're just waiting for some ideas to drop into place with respect to that. Okay, I think we'll close then, and I'll thank everybody again, and especially Victoria for keeping us on track and running the behind the scenes technical issues. Thank you.